There's a mass exodus happening, and almost no one is talking about it. People aren't marching in protest. They're not screaming on the internet. They're simply disappearing, quietly, gracefully. Spiritually awake, deeply self-aware individuals are pulling away from society, not out of bitterness or defeat, but because something inside them says, enough. They're leaving social media, walking away from corporate careers, distancing themselves from old friendships, from performative relationships, from roles that no longer fit. Not with drama, but with stillness, with clarity, with intention. Carl Jung predicted this. He called it the necessary withdrawal. When a person becomes deeply conscious, so psychologically awake that the unconscious world starts to feel not just irritating, but physically painful. Withdrawal isn't a reaction. It's a requirement. This isn't escapism. It's not apathy. And it's not antisocial. It's evolution. And in the next few minutes, you're going to understand why. You'll see how Jung not only foresaw this exodus, but explained it as an archetypal stage in the process of individuation. And if you've been feeling the urge to disappear, to pull back, to disconnect, to protect something deep within you, this might be the most validating message you've heard in a long time. Because what feels like withdrawal might actually be awakening. Let me show you why. Some of the most conscious, awake, and psychologically developed people you know are fading out of public view. Not loudly, not rebelliously, but with a quiet dignity that says, I can't keep playing this game anymore. They're logging off social media, not because they don't care, but because every scroll feels like 1,000 unprocessed projections clawing at their psyche. They're leaving cities, ending careers, releasing relationships, not because they're broken, but because staying would require them to betray something they've worked so hard to find: themselves. You might have noticed it. You might be living it. And if you are, you're not alone. In fact, Jung would say, you're right on time. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, believed that each person has a deep inner drive to become whole, to move beyond the masks we wear and toward the true self. But he also knew that this journey, the process of individuation, comes with a cost. At a certain point, the individual becomes so aware, so integrated, that participating in the collective unconscious, the social scripts, the surface-level interactions, the unspoken rules of fitting in, becomes unbearable. Not just uncomfortable, but somatically painful. And this isn't poetic metaphor. Jung described this withdrawal as a necessary psychological phase, a period when the conscious individual, unable to keep pretending, must retreat, not to escape responsibility, but to preserve their inner truth. Society, Jung said, is built on collective unconsciousness, the shared illusions, projections, and repressions we agree to live by. These aren't bugs in the system. They are the system, and they only work if everyone participates unconsciously. The moment someone wakes up, truly wakes up, not just intellectually, but psychologically, spiritually, they become what Jung might call a glitch in the matrix. They see what others won't. They feel what others numb. They hear what others silence. They walk into a room full of people, and it's like standing in a dream where everyone else is asleep, but smiling, talking, repeating lines from scripts they didn't write and no longer question. And suddenly, pretending becomes unbearable. This is the moment Jung called the burden of consciousness, where you can no longer engage with the world as it once was, because you are no longer who you once were. Every conversation now asks you to pretend you didn't see what you saw. Every job interview asks you to perform a persona you've already outgrown. Every social setting nudges you to dim your light so others aren't blinded by your authenticity. And so, you begin to pull away, not because you hate society, but because you can no longer betray yourself to belong in it. Jung lived this himself. After his own confrontation with the unconscious, he found social interactions not just tedious, but painful. He could no longer sit in rooms where everyone was acting as if they weren't. So he withdrew. He built a tower, literally, a stone retreat on the shore of Lake Zurich called Bollingen. There, he wrote, carved, painted, reflected. There he stopped performing and started being. Not out of rejection of the world, but in devotion to his inner truth. And if you've been feeling the same pull, Jung wouldn't pathologize it. He would honor it. Because in his eyes, this wasn't retreat, it was initiation. Here's what Jung understood, what most of society still refuses to see. The greatest threat to your peace isn't chaos, it's unconsciousness. And that's what society runs on. We live in a world built on shadow projection, where people deny their inner darkness and unconsciously project it onto others. That's why enemies are always out there. That's why entire groups get blamed, why outrage is endless, why no one ever feels seen, but everyone feels attacked. This is the architecture of the collective unconscious. And when you become spiritually awake, when you've done the shadow work, when you've faced the darkness within yourself, you begin to see just how much of society is built on the avoidance of that same inner confrontation. You become a mirror in a room of people hiding from their own reflections. Suddenly, you see the political debates not as quests for truth, but as mass projections, two sides screaming their unprocessed pain at each other and calling it justice. You see online outrage not as righteousness, but as collective shadow material hunting for a scapegoat. You see wars not just as geopolitical conflict, but as the violent clash of unintegrated shadows. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. This is what Jung meant when he said that integrating your personal shadow makes the collective shadow unbearable to witness. You've already faced your own capacity for darkness. You've owned it, transformed it. But now, everywhere you look, you see people violently disowning theirs, blaming, judging, canceling, condemning. And it hurts. Not morally, energetically, psychologically, physically. Because when you're conscious, you become sensitive, not in a fragile way, in a deeply attuned way. You can feel when someone's projecting. You can sense when a room is filled with repressed emotion. You pick up on the static in every scroll, the ego in every tweet, the pain behind every perfect picture. Being around mass unconsciousness begins to feel like psychological violence. You're not judging them. You're just incompatible. Imagine this. You're trying to hold a high-frequency vibration in a storm of static noise. Every interaction becomes a translation effort, like decoding a language no one else knows they're speaking. You smile when expected. You play the role. But inside, you're exhausted. This is what Jung called psychological labor, the invisible work conscious people do just to exist in unconscious spaces. You're constantly filtering projections, maintaining energetic boundaries, translating depth into surface-level conversation, holding your truth while surrounded by personas. It's like swimming upstream in a tsunami of unconsciousness. And eventually, you have to get out of the water or drown. Jung's clients felt this in their bodies. Chronic fatigue, mysterious illnesses, burnout that no vacation could cure. And over time, Jung realized, they weren't sick. They were exhausted from constantly upholding consciousness in environments that demanded performance. Because here's the core mechanism. When you've touched your authentic self, going back to the persona feels like death. The persona is the social mask. It says what's appropriate, performs what's accepted. And before awakening, you could live through that mask without even knowing it. But after awakening, every moment of persona performance feels like betrayal. Jung saw this repeatedly. The workplace persona, the family role, the social media identity, the acceptable emotions, the right opinions. When you've individuated, when you've met yourself behind the mask, you just can't go back. You'd rather be alone and real than social and false. And so begins the retreat, not from arrogance, not from despair, but from energetic incompatibility. A retreat not into hiding, but into healing. Not away from life, but toward truth. The world hasn't changed. You have, and that changes everything. Now let's make this real. Because this isn't just theory. It's not just philosophy. It's your life. You've felt this, haven't you? The growing fatigue in conversations that used to energize you. The tightness in your chest before walking into a room where you'll have to perform. The internal scream behind the smile you give at work, at family dinners, at social gatherings. You used to be able to tolerate it all, maybe even enjoy it. But something shifted, subtly at first, then overwhelmingly. Suddenly you're wondering, what's wrong with me? Jung's answer, nothing. Absolutely nothing is wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not depressed. You're not failing to cope. You're becoming conscious. And consciousness, in an unconscious world, comes at a cost. Jung witnessed this firsthand in the lives of his patients. Brilliant, successful, outwardly functional individuals who began to unravel not because they were weak, but because they had begun to awaken. One of his patients was a highly respected corporate executive. She had status, wealth, a well-curated life. But after years of shadow work, of deep psychological exploration, something broke open inside her. She began sitting in board meetings and feeling like she was watching a play, everyone reciting their lines, performing their roles, pretending it all mattered. And in her words, "My authentic self has no voice in that room. Only my persona did. And she's dead." She didn't storm out. She didn't burn bridges. She quietly disappeared. Over the course of months, she stepped away. She moved to a small town, found simplicity, chose real over successful, not because she failed, but because she had succeeded at finding herself. Another case Jung documented was a teacher, deeply devoted to her students, beloved by her peers. But after an intense period of inner transformation, she developed severe chronic fatigue. Doctors ran every test. Nothing. Her body was fine, but her energy was gone. In analysis with Jung, she realized why. Every day, she was expending massive psychological energy, holding her frequency in an unconscious environment, surrounded by colleagues trapped in roles, students acting out projections, systems that demanded performance over presence. She wasn't ill. She was depleted. And when she left teaching, moved into nature, found solitude, her energy came rushing back, not because she rested, but because she no longer had to fight to stay awake. Jung saw this over and over again. People awakening to their true self, only to find that the world they once fit into now felt like sandpaper to their soul. And if you've been experiencing this, if your fatigue feels deeper than physical, if your disillusionment feels existential, you're not alone. You're not too sensitive. You're not checking out. You're checking in to something far more real. There was also the philosopher, one of Jung's analysans. He was on track for academic greatness, tenure, publications, respect. Then he vanished. 3 years. No lectures, no papers, no presence. People whispered he's having a breakdown. But he wasn't. He was having a breakthrough. In solitude, without the weight of persona, he integrated insights that would have been impossible under the pressure of performance. When he returned, he brought with him ideas that reshaped entire frameworks of thought. But those ideas needed space to gestate. And that space required withdrawal. So if you've been feeling the pull to disappear, to simplify, to stop performing, it's not a flaw. It's not failure. It's a sign that you've outgrown the roles that once held you. A sign that your authentic self is emerging. A sign that your nervous system, your psyche, your soul is saying, this environment no longer supports my becoming. And the most courageous thing you can do? Listen. But what happens after the retreat? What comes after the decision to step away from the noise, the performance, the unconscious currents of everyday life? Jung had a name for it. He called it the Hermit phase, not a mood, not a personality trait, not a lifestyle trend, an archetype, a necessary and universal stage on the path of individuation. The hermit is not someone who hides from life, but someone who withdraws in order to protect something sacred. Someone who understands that transformation requires silence, integration requires space, and wholeness cannot emerge in an environment that only accepts fragments. This isn't misanthropy. It's not about hating people or rejecting society. It's about psychological necessity. Because when you're undergoing deep change, staying immersed in the same patterns, the same conversations, the same unconscious loops, it doesn't just slow your growth, it fractures it. Jung emphasized this again and again. Withdrawal is not escape, it's preparation. Imagine a caterpillar halfway through metamorphosis being pulled out of its cocoon and told to get back to work, smile for the camera, give a TED talk. The transformation wouldn't complete. It would be interrupted, stunted. That's what happens when we try to stay in the world while undergoing deep inner change. Something sacred is compromised. So the psyche protects itself. It withdraws. It builds a cocoon, or in Jung's case, a stone tower by a lake. Ballingen, a space where he could be fully himself, unmasked, undisturbed. Jung didn't go there to escape the world. He went there to become real within it. And if you're in your own hermit phase right now, choosing solitude over stimulation, silence over validation, you're not failing. You're evolving. This is how inner wisdom is born. This is where the fragments of your being begin to integrate into something whole, not under the pressure to explain yourself, not through performative healing, but through quiet, private, deeply personal transformation. And yes, it can feel lonely. It can feel like vanishing, like no one understands, like you're wasting time while the world moves forward. But you're not disappearing. You're gestating. You're becoming something society doesn't yet know how to value, but will. Because here's what Jung emphasized. The hermit phase is never the end. It's the in-between. It's the descent into the underworld before the return. It's the silence before the song. It's the sacred pause where your soul catches up to your becoming. This is why it feels so disorienting. You're no longer who you used to be, but you're not yet who you're becoming. You're standing on the threshold, and the culture doesn't offer much guidance for this place. It celebrates hustle, visibility, growth you can post about. But this work, the invisible work of becoming, doesn't photograph well. There are no hashtags for quiet integration, but that doesn't make it less real. In fact, Jung would argue, it's the most real phase of all. It's in the hermit phase that you reclaim the parts of yourself that the world told you were too much, too deep, too strange. It's here you unlearn the performances that once kept you safe. It's here you begin to hear your own voice again, not the voice of your persona, but the voice of yourself. So if you're feeling the urge to pull away, if you're craving space, simplicity, stillness, don't shame yourself. Don't rush your return. You're not falling behind. You're walking a path carved into the human soul long before you were born. And you're not alone. Every conscious being must pass through this doorway. Every awakened soul must sit in this silence. Not as punishment, but as preparation. Because something is coming. Something that will require all of you, whole, integrated, awake. And the only way to meet it is to disappear for a while. The hermit phase doesn't last forever, because eventually the stillness starts to speak. Not in the loud voice of ego, but in the soft pulse of inner knowing. And one day, maybe without warning, you feel it. It's time to return, but not to who you were, not to the systems you left, not to the roles you outgrew. You return as someone different, someone deeper, someone real. Carl Jung described this as the final phase of the individuation journey. Return with gifts. After disappearing from the collective unconscious, after confronting your own shadow, integrating your fragmented parts, and resting in the solitude of self, you come back, but not to the center, to the edges. You become what Jung called a border dweller, a person who lives between worlds, present, but no longer participating in the unconscious machinery, available, but not absorbed, no longer asleep, but also no longer shouting at those who are. You don't come back to convert anyone. You come back to hold space, to create pockets of consciousness where others, quietly awakening, can find refuge. You come back as an artist who creates from soul, not for applause. As a healer who guides others through terrain you've already crossed. As a teacher, not of facts, but of integration. And sometimes you don't return publicly at all. You write, you tend to the land, you raise your children differently. You hold integrity in a system that runs on artifice. You don't have to shout to change the world. You just have to stop betraying yourself. Because your very presence, your wholeness, is a frequency. One that interrupts the unconscious patterning of everyone around you, without saying a word. And the world feels it. This is the real reason spiritually awake people are disappearing. Not to run away, but to become something the world has never seen. They're not abandoning society. They're preparing something for it. Because here's what Jung knew, what history shows us, and what the soul confirms. Not everyone awakens at the same time. But those who awaken first must go ahead and build what the others will one day need. The artists, the visionaries, the philosophers, the healers, they vanish. They go quiet. They stop playing the game. But while the world thinks they've given up, they're actually building the next one. It's evolution. And if you're in this phase, if you feel like you're disappearing, let me offer you this. You're not invisible. You're just in the deep part of the ocean, where light doesn't reach, but transformation does. And when you resurface, you'll carry something the world doesn't even know it needs yet. So honor your disappearance. Use it. Integrate in it. Let it reshape you. Because when you return, If you return, you won't be coming back empty-handed. You'll bring gifts only solitude could have given you. Wisdom that no institution could have taught, depth that no persona could contain. You'll speak truths that can only be spoken by those who've sat with silence long enough to hear them. And the ones who are ready will hear you. So if you've made it this far in the video, I want to say this directly to you. You're not weak for needing space. You're not selfish for saying no. You're not antisocial for craving solitude. You're awake. And awakening requires different conditions than sleep. Let yourself withdraw. Not forever, but for now. Let yourself become. Fully, quietly. And then, if it calls you, return. Not to perform, not to fit in, but to be the kind of presence that makes others remember who they are. You're not abandoning the collective. You're pioneering where it must go. And if you're looking for others walking this same path, people who understand what it means to disappear with purpose, this is your space. I make videos for the ones disappearing, for the ones becoming, for the ones building what the world isn't ready for yet. So if this resonated, if you felt seen, I invite you to subscribe. And when you're ready for your next step, watch the video now on your screen. It's about the Hermit archetype and how to use solitude not as escape, but as sacred transformation. Because you're not alone in this. You're not lost. You're on the path. And the path is sacred.